Under the full Cambodian moon, pale as spilled milk across the ancient spires of Angkor, the night hums with cicadas and incense smoke drifting like ghosts through carvings that seem to breathe whenever torchlight trembles softly against the stone's sacred skin. A French scholar stands at the temple's threshold, notebook half open, his fingers slick with sweat, unsure whether it's the humid air or the pulse of wonder shaking through him as he watches the royal dancers glide like shadows made of gold. Each movement flows like silk poured over a marble, a living manuscript of myths older than empire, and among them, one dancer moves as though the moon itself dictates her rhythm, her wrists tracing verses invisible to any known language. He has come for inscriptions and history, but finds poetry written in motion instead. And though he tells himself it's only curiosity, his heartbeat is too loud for any reasonable science to explain without surrendering to fascination. You probably won't survive this kind of beauty, he thinks, half laughing at his own weakness beneath the perfume of sandalwood and smoke. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. She notices him, the foreigner with trembling hands and a notebook that can't possibly capture what her body remembers of gods, water and dust. One glance, quick as breath, and history itself begins to tilt towards something irreversible. The court calls this sacred dance Robam Tep Apsara, born from divine myth and performed before kings. Yet historians still argue whether these gestures honour deities or veiled messages of resistance beneath the watchful eyes of French protectorate officials. He sketches the silhouette of towers, pretending indifference, while palace ministers glide nearby in gold-threaded robes, their perfume thick with sandalwood and their whispers braided with suspicion, like vines climbing through royal corridors. It's 1868, under King Norodom's rule. The empire's shadow stretches quietly through corridors where music replaces prayer, and beauty itself must bow before politics pretending to be divine order written in gold. Scholars will later claim he came seeking epigraphy, but the truth is simpler. He follows the tremor of her ankle bells more than the echo of any sacred inscription etched upon temple walls. She turns once more, her gaze deliberate now, and every rule of decorum folds upon itself like wet paper melting in the monsoon's breath. The drums slow, her hands rise in a gesture that feels like warning and invitation at once. When the final symbol falls, he cannot move. He writes one trembling line, the air bent toward her. Perhaps it's the heat, or perhaps it's the oldest spell that art and desire ever conspired to invent together. A minister's robe whispers past. Danger brushes his shoulder. The scholar lowers his head, as if worship disguised itself as humility, though his pulse betrays devotion far stronger than any sanctioned faith. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, rain begins to fall, gentle, prophetic, and mercifully ignorant of the hearts it will drown before dawn arrives. The night exhales, pretending nothing ever happened beneath its silver witness. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together beneath the same patient moon that once watched them begin. Morning seeps through carved shutters, painting the scholar's scattered papers gold as distant drums echo across the courtyard, where smoke from early offerings curls around lotus ponds, carrying the quiet promise of another rehearsal, shaped by devotion and carefully guarded ritual. He stands beside the veranda, pretending to analyze ancient language, yet his gaze drifts inevitably toward the dancer's practice circle, where she moves again, Her gestures balance between duty and yearning, as though every breath she takes rewrites an unspoken vow. Their silent exchanges grow bolder each morning, woven into the pauses between her steps and the moments before his ink meets paper, until even the space separating them feels charged with an invisible grammar neither dares articulate aloud. One afternoon he gathers his courage, asking her the meaning of a pose with fingers curved like moons and the palm facing earth. She whispers surrender, then laughs softly because surrender is dangerous inside any palace shaped by watchful shadows. Court scholars insist these dances honour celestial beings, yet older performers claim they once addressed mortal kings instead, blurring devotion and tribute. Historians still argue whether this dual fidelity protected performers or trapped them beneath veiled obedience. He begins attending rehearsals under the excuse of studying symbolism, though his sketches now include notations of her laughter, the subtle tilt of her head, and the delicate pulse visible along her throat whenever the music pauses unexpectedly. During a candlelit practice, she falters mid-turn and he steadies her with one quick hand. The fleeting touch fills the room with jasmine from her braid, a scent strong enough to silence every rule he once believed he understood. Later, he documents the moment with academic precision, disguising her identity behind the phrase "morning star over Tonle Sap," a quirky code scholars will misinterpret for decades without realising it marked a forbidden heartbeat. Servants begin whispering that the foreigner lingers too close, too often, and though gossip is softer than wind, it travels swiftly through corridors where loyalty trembles beneath sandalwood smoke and the ever-present thrum of ceremonial drums. The scholar tells himself this is admiration, not desire, yet when she dances barefoot on cool marble, leaving faint imprints of sweat and sandalwood, every rational thought dissolves like dust swept into monsoon waters. He learns her given name, Sokha, meaning purity, though courtiers call her Neri Chan, the graceful one, a title that sounds respectful but hides the truth that beauty often becomes property inside royal chambers. During a festival night when candles float along the moat like drifting stars, she performs a tale of a goddess falling for a mortal, and though the crowd applauds, he tastes an irony sharp enough to wound. He wishes to tell her art belongs to those who feel it, not those who command it, but his Khmer remains fractured and her safety too fragile to gamble against palace rules carved from silence. When she bows before the king's throne, her eyes flicker toward him with a message thin as breath yet thunderous in meaning, whispering "remember me," even when the gods refuse to. He nods once, sealing a vow neither law nor faith can sanctify, and somewhere in the rafters a gecko chirps, as though amused by mortals who dare challenge histories written long before their births. Rain sweeps across the courtyard in silver veils as evening falls, and the scholar follows a servant's whispered directions toward the golden pavilion, a secluded structure once reserved for meditation, yet now serving as refuge for secrets too fragile for palace corridors. Sokha waits beside an open lattice window where lamplight flickers across her silk bodice, her shoulders rising and falling with careful breaths as though she fears even the air might betray the quiet daring stitched into her heartbeat tonight. He hesitates at the threshold until she lifts one hand. Just a gesture, small yet unmistakable, inviting him inside with the same confidence she uses when summoning entire mythologies on stage, before kings and courtiers hungry for spectacle. The roof groans softly under monsoon winds, and she laughs at his startled glance. explaining that older dancers believe storms arrive whenever spirits eavesdrop on forbidden conversations, a quirky superstition the palace refuses to dismiss entirely. He asks why she summoned him, and her reply drifts like smoke. Because pretending we do not see each other is heavier than danger. The words tremble, yet her eyes hold an unwavering steadiness born from years of disciplined performance. She describes how palace officials monitor every dancer's alliances, noting who lingers where, who glances when, and who dares to breathe outside choreographed boundaries. Historians still argue whether these surveillance rituals protected royal dignity or simply fed courtly paranoia. The scholar feels the room tilt as she steps closer, her jasmine-scented braid brushing his forearm, and for a heartbeat the rain outside seems to hush, as though the storm itself pauses to witness their reckless honesty. When thunder rumbles overhead, she whispers that she once carved a prayer beneath this pavilion's floorboard, asking not for fame or favour, but for one moment of unguarded truth untouched by royal expectation or foreign scrutiny. He kneels to search, lifting a loose plank to reveal a faint inscription, etched with a dancer's precision. Though the words have softened with time, he recognises the curve of longing unmistakably threaded through each careful stroke. Sokka watches him read, her expression shifting between pride and fear, because sharing a secret is its own rebellion, and every rebellion inside these walls echoes too loudly against stone trained to remember everything. He places the plank back gently, promising in his unsteady Khmer that her truth will remain untouched. She smiles, startled by the earnestness in his voice, as though such promises belong only to legends sung at festivals. Lightning flares, illuminating the pavilion's gilded beams, and she tells him that dancers believe storms cleanse unspoken desires, leaving only those strong enough to survive the following calm, a belief half spiritual and half comforting. They stand inches apart, neither daring to reach, yet the distance feels thinner than silk. Outside, the rain intensifies, erasing footsteps and softening the world into a private sanctuary carved from thunder and trembling confession. She warns him softly that the palace remembers everything, even what is whispered in storms. But he answers that memory itself cannot frighten him more than the thought of losing her to silence. For the first time, her hand finds his, small and steady, sealing a promise neither fully understands yet both instinctively trust, as the golden pavilion glows like a lantern held between two uncertain hearts. Rumours drift through the royal residence like smoke from smouldering resin, gathering shape inside kitchens, guard posts and dressing chambers, until whispers about a foreign scholar and a dancer begin echoing louder than the monsoon drums pounding across the flooded palace grounds. Sokka senses the tension first, noticing how attendants glance away too quickly and how senior dancers rearrange their formations, silently warning her that stories, true or imagined, travel faster than loyalty through halls carved to amplify secrets. The scholar feels the shift when his access to archives becomes more restricted, with guards politely redirecting him toward approved sections, a gesture wrapped in courtesy but anchored in suspicion sharpened by imperial politics. French officials observe him with narrowed eyes, unsettled by the possibility that he might be forming alliances outside their jurisdiction. A quirky colonial fear rooted more in pride than practicality, especially among administrators desperate to appear indispensable. At evening rehearsals, Sokka notices a court minister watching her with unnerving stillness. his expression carved into disciplined neutrality, though she recognises the dangerous curiosity behind eyes trained to measure obedience like currency. Historians still argue whether these surveillance tactics aimed to maintain ceremonial purity or merely to reinforce the fragile hierarchy balancing French influence with Khmer sovereignty, a balancing act often more theatrical than the dances themselves. The pavilion where she once shared her secret begins feeling haunted by its own memory, and she avoids it, fearing the floorboards hold echoes too loud for safety, especially when silence becomes a currency traded in sideways glances. Servants whisper that the scholar's sketches have been examined, though no one admits who ordered it, and each rumour feels like a thread tightening around Sokka's pulse until even breathing requires careful calculation. One afternoon, while crossing the courtyard, she hears two younger dancers gossiping about a foreigner teaching someone improper gestures. They stop instantly when she approaches, confirming the growing web of danger stitching itself around her name. He notices her restraint, the practiced way she hides emotion beneath perfectly measured posture, and though she smiles at him from across the hall, the smile carries the heaviness of a warning neither can speak aloud. A royal astrologer passes by, muttering that misaligned stars threaten the palace. A superstition some dismiss yet others cling to, especially during weeks when scandals stalk corridors like restless spirits seeking attention. That night, as Sokka lights a small lantern in her chamber, she senses the palace breathing around her. Too many walls, too many ears, and wonders how love learned to feel heavier than chains forged for soldiers. The scholar writes frantic notes in his journal, documenting shifting behaviours and strained interactions, not as a researcher but as a man terrified of losing someone he barely has the right to long for. During rehearsal, when she performs a sequence representing a trapped deity seeking escape, their eyes meet, and the symbolism cuts deeper than choreography, turning art into a mirror reflecting fears neither can soothe. By week's end, the palace feels colder, as though its stones grow wary of them, and the love that once bloomed in stormlight now stands exposed beneath scrutiny, sharp enough to reshape destiny. A banyan tree older than royal dynasties spreads its tangled roots near the servant quarters, and beneath its heavy canopy, Sokka meets the scholar in a moment stolen from danger, unaware that a palace attendant hides nearby, clutching a basket of linens while listening with breathless curiosity sharpened by fear. The attendant, a young man tasked with polishing ceremonial bronze, watches the pair exchange quiet words that float like threads of incense smoke, and though he understands little, he recognises the unmistakable tenderness between them, a tenderness forbidden in a palace obsessed with precision and hierarchy. He debates revealing himself, yet superstition grips him. Older servants claim banyan trees' house spirits, capable of twisting destinies, and despite such quirky beliefs, he fears those spirits might punish him if he interrupts what feels like a story blooming where no story should bloom. When the dancer gently touches the scholar's wrist, something within the attendant snaps into certainty, and he retreats to the shadows, convinced the palace must be warned, believing a threat lurks in any affection crossing the delicate border between Khmer tradition and French presence. Historians still argue whether betrayal in royal court stemmed more from duty or ambition, but this young attendant convinces himself he acts out of loyalty, crafting a narrative where he becomes the guardian of order against a love destined to unravel ceremonial boundaries. He approaches a minister with trembling resolve, describing a foreigner's impropriety beneath the banyan. Though the minister's expression barely flickers, a spark of intrigue forms instantly, for palace politics thrive on secrets delivered by those desperate to be useful. By sundown, whispers have multiplied, slithering through kitchens, stables, rehearsal halls, reshaping facts into sharper accusations, until Soccer feels the air around her tighten like silk bound too tightly around a dancer's ribs during performance. That night, guards search the outskirts of the courtyard under pretense of routine inspection, yet their lantern beams linger too long near the banyan's roots, and the scholar senses danger creeping from directions he can neither track nor defend against. Soccer's mentor pulls her aside before rehearsal, warning her that some believe she has strayed from the discipline expected of performers representing divine embodiment, a rebuke delivered with soft voice yet carrying the weight of potential punishment. By the time the torches burn low, both lovers realise something vital has shifted beneath the banyan's shadow, and though no official order has been spoken, the palace now watches them with eyes sharpened by suspicion, hungry enough to consume truth entirely. Guards summoned Soccer before dawn, leading her through dim corridors where oil lamps gutter against damp stone, and when she enters the council chamber, senior ministers sit in rigid silence, their expressions carved with ceremonial restraint as they announce her disciplinary review, a phrase always meaning punishment softened by formality yet sharpened by intent. They strip her of her silver ankle bells, symbols of mastery and classical Khmer dance, placing them on a lacquered tray as though removing the very voice of her craft, and while no chains touch her skin, humiliation binds tighter than metal, especially within a palace where reputation determines survival more fiercely than strength or skill. The scholar is not permitted to witness her questioning. Instead, French officials intercept him near the archives, informing him with forced politeness that his research privileges are temporarily revoked, citing regulations last updated during King Norodom's early reforms, a historical footnote now wielded conveniently to disguise political anxiety. Inside the chamber, Soccer answers inquiries about her whereabouts, her associations, her motives, each question delivered with a gentle menace that reveals how accusations bloom fastest when nurtured by envy, and though she speaks steadily, she senses the verdict has already crystallized before her first word even escapes. Ministers claim her recent behavior disrupts artistic discipline, citing omens from the royal astrologer who warned of emotional imbalance influencing performances, a quirky justification often deployed when officials require spiritual legitimacy to mask decisions rooted in fear rather than celestial alignment. Historians still argue whether trials like these genuinely protected the sanctity of court dance, or simply served as tools to silence performers whose autonomy threatened fragile hierarchies balancing French oversight with Khmer heritage, a tension neither side ever fully resolved. By midday, Soccer is reassigned to a lower rehearsal tier, forced to practice behind a screen where younger dancers cannot see her, transforming her once celebrated artistry into a ghost-like presence meant to fade quietly from collective admiration. Meanwhile, the scholar receives orders to leave the palace grounds within 3 days for protocol clarification, a euphemism so transparent he feels its sting immediately, realizing that every hallway he once explored freely now watches him like a narrowing throat preparing to swallow dissent. When they attempt to burn the letters he once exchanged with Soccer, notes folded from scraps of his research paper, he lunges forward instinctively, but a guard restrains him, and the smoke rising from the brazier smells of ink, jasmine oil, and the soft crackle of trust turning to ash. That evening, Sokka kneels alone in the rehearsal hall, touching her bare ankles where bells once chimed, and though grief presses heavy upon her lungs, she repeats a single vow in silence, that no decree, no minister, and no empire will sever the memory she shares with him. The scholar leaves Phnom Penh under a low-dawn haze, following a French riverboat assigned to escort him north along the Mekong, and as the engine sputters against the current, he watches the pallies recede into mist, feeling as though each bend in the river peels away another layer of the life he once believed unchanging. He writes furiously in his notebook during the journey, sketching Sokka's silhouette, her gestures, her soft laughter, until pages fill with memories that pulse like fresh wounds, and although officers aboard the boat glance at him suspiciously, none interfere. Assuming grief is simply another indulgence of sentimental foreigners. Villagers along the riverbanks wave from stilt houses painted in ochre and teal, and he imagines Sokka dancing somewhere among them, though he knows she remains trapped within palace walls. Still, he clings to the comforting, quirky belief that rivers can carry thoughts upstream if whispered fervently enough. Historians still argue whether the Mekong served more as a trade artery or a symbolic spine connecting communities fractured by shifting colonial boundaries, yet for him it becomes a living archive, a moving mirror where he searches for traces of her in every ripple reflecting the sun. Nights on the deck ache with loneliness, and each time he hears distant temple bells drifting across mangrove marshes, he wonders whether Sokka hears the same echo, or whether her world has been swallowed entirely by the rehearsals and punishments imposed to dull her spirit into palace obedience. He dreams of her kneeling on cool marble floors, repeating ancient gestures with clipped precision, and in those dreams he reaches for her, only to wake grasping humid air as the riverboat groans beneath him, like a restless creature carrying secrets too heavy to forget. In Kampong Cham he meets monks who speak kindly of court dancers, claiming their movements preserve cosmic harmony, but he notices a strange reluctance whenever he mentions Sokka, as though her name carries the weight of a story locals sense yet dare not articulate. He sends letters southward, 3, then 5, then more, addressed to servants he once befriended, hoping at least one may slip a message past palace gates, though each envelope returns unopened, its seal unbroken, as though silence itself has become the final gatekeeper. Weeks dissolve into months as he surveys ancient temples, translating decaying inscriptions, yet every carving of an apsara reminds him of Sokka's controlled grace, and he begins to understand that exile is not merely distance, but the slow erosion of certainty beneath unrelenting memory. By the time the river carries him toward Laos, he realizes he is not running from danger but circling the edges of an absence too vast to confront directly, and in that realization he whispers her name into the dusk, trusting the Mekong to remember what he cannot hold. Years later, the scholar returns to Cambodia as an aging man with trembling hands, stepping through Angkor's overgrown gates where strangler figs clutch sandstone walls, and he feels history breathing against his skin, reminding him that time in sacred places stretches differently from time measured by ordinary calendars or foreign clocks. He searches the ruins with determined frailty, guided by memories more vivid than maps, until he reaches the golden pavilion's remnants where collapsed beams lie softened by moss, and as he kneels beside the familiar floorboard, he senses the air thicken with echoes only love keeps from dissolving. When he lifts the plank, he discovers new carvings, delicate patterns etched in practiced strokes likely made years after his exile. And though the words are faint, he recognizes Sokka's hand, steady and graceful, spelling a prayer that speaks of waiting without expectation yet refusing to forget. Historians still argue whether dancers ever revisited forbidden sites after punishments, but these carvings defy every assumption, suggesting she returned alone, perhaps late at night, choosing to entrust her truth to the pavilion because stone listens more faithfully than courtiers trained in selective silence. He touches the inscription with a reverence deeper than any academic discovery, whispering her name into shadows drifting across ancient columns. And though no answer comes, he feels a quiet presence, as if the ruins cradle stories too sacred to fade entirely into dust. Pilgrims passing through offer incense to guardian spirits, unaware that a foreign scholar kneels nearby in gratitude for a love the Empire tried to silence. And one monk remarks that some visitors carry storms behind their ribs, a quirky observation that startles him with its unexpected accuracy. He leaves a final note beneath the plank, 5 sentences written with slow tenderness, thanking her for every memory, every defiance, every whispered vow, hoping the gesture will linger somewhere between devotion and release, even if no living eyes ever read it. As dusk swallows the courtyard, fireflies drift like floating prayers around him, and he senses the past settling softly across his shoulders, not as weight but as warmth, the kind earned only by hearts that dared love beyond what rules allowed. Before departing, he looks back once more, imagining Sokka performing her quiet nightly prayer, and he feels the world sharpen with a bittersweet clarity. He has not returned to find her living presence, but to confirm she never disappeared from the one place, untouched by time, memory. He walks away slowly, trusting the ruins to guard their vow, knowing that even when empires crumble and dynasties fade, love that never asked permission continues echoing through stones, water, and wind, refusing to vanish as long as someone remembers how it began. The night settles gently now, loosening its breath around the old stones and letting the last traces of sunlight slip beneath the horizon. The scholar's footsteps fade into the quiet, and the ruins return to their patient stillness, holding his memories the way ancient places often do, with a tenderness shaped by time rather than sentiment. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the soft rustle of his final note beneath the loosened floorboard, a small piece of paper resting in the dark where 2 lives once intersected. The air around it moves with the steady rhythm of evening, neither hurried nor hesitant, simply accepting that stories do not end so much as they settle. The dancer's presence lingers too, not as a ghost or an ache, but as a faint warmth woven into the corridors where she once breathed. Her prayer carved into the wood remains, softened by years yet still shining with intention, a quiet reminder that love does not always require witnesses to remain real. And as the moon rises over Angkor, washing the ruins in silver calm, the world seems to exhale. The river slows, the cicadas hush. Even the wind drifts more softly between the towers, as though inviting you to release whatever weight you carried into this story. For now, just rest with the quiet. Let the stillness gather gently around you. Let your breathing slow, matching the rhythm of the ancient stones. And when you're ready, allow this final thought to linger. Some connections never vanish. They change shape, they soften, they settle, but they endure patiently, quietly, always.